She was a single mother trying to make a fresh start.
She was well liked by her family and friends, seen as generally a good person.
She was single and she was freewheeling and full of life.
But instead of finding a second chance at love, she made a dangerous enemy.
She tried to provide the best for her family, but sadly, she let evil lurk in.
You can spend that much time with somebody and be so off on what they really are.
911, what is your emergency? She's in a car, the window's broke, she's bleeding.
Investigators would be pushed to extraordinary lengths to unravel the mystery and bring a killer to justice.
He thought he was being followed, and he was, as it turned out. That surveillance video is very telling.
One of them was right out when she was killed.
Oh my God.
As far as just being tragic and bizarre and twisted, it ranks very near the top.
July 5th, 2003. Shortly after 11 p.m., police in the Tampa suburb of Pinellas Park received a panicked 911 call.
911, what is your emergency? I heard a noise that woke me up. I came down. She's bleeding. I can't get her to respond. Okay, what is it? Get her to wake up.
First responders arrive at the home of 37-year-old Sandra Razzo to find her collapsed in the driver's seat of her BMW.
There was glass everywhere in the garage. There's blood everywhere inside the car.
It was a brutal, terrifying crime. At this point, we didn't know if she was still alive or had passed away.
They hurried her very quickly onto an ambulance into the closest trauma center.
Along the way, they determined she's been shot several times in the head, chest, and legs.
They didn't know she had actually been shot until they started treating her and they realized how many injuries she had.
She was shot 8 times at close range.
Sandy Razzo was transported to the local hospital where she was pronounced dead. At that point, they shifted it to a homicide investigation.
Back at the crime scene, detectives searched for clues to tell them what happened.
At the scene, we still had kind of a mess to deal with. I mean, we had a lot of broken glass and blood and just things that we weren't sure were going to be evidence yet at that point.
On the floor, they saw multiple shell casings, which are expended cartridges from a firearm, a .22 caliber rifle, which totaled 8.
Once we realized we had an actual shooting, those things run through your mind. Is it a robbery? Was it an ambush? I mean, what are the circumstances?
Her wallet's right there on the floor. Sandy Razzo's money, credit cards, everything. The car's still there. You begin to rule out robbery almost right away.
One thing seems clear. This was no random act of violence.
If 8 shots were fired, that sends a message of this is personal.
It was someone who didn't like Sandy, someone that had had a problem with Sandy, someone who wanted Sandy dead.
In 2001, Sandy Razzo was going through a breakup with an ex-boyfriend in Alabama. She needed to make a fresh start, so she moved to Tampa, Florida, and settled into the middle-class community of Pinellas Park.
She was just such an outgoing, positive personality, was very much into being a friend to people.
She was a single mom, doing everything that she could to make life better for her child.
She was sharing custody of her daughter with her ex out of state.
She worked at a place called Green Iguana, which is a very popular hotspot, especially late at night.
Sandy worked in an area of Tampa that was really the go-to place for nightlife. This was a place where you went to party.
Sandy, she was very outgoing, very athletic, friendly, helpful, a good employee. We all worked the same hours, basically just the weekends, from 9 o'clock till 3 in the morning.
Sandy was working hard and saving money, sharing a townhouse with her close friend, Tony Ponicall. But less than 2 years after moving to Tampa, she would be gunned down in cold blood.
We dispatched 2 detectives down there to start interviewing him and finding out what he knew.
Mr. Ponicle was the person who discovered the body. He was the person that called 911.
Tony was at home asleep, and he heard a loud bang, and he went downstairs to investigate.
Tony Ponicle told us he did hear the shots going off, and he thought they were just fireworks left over, from the 4th of July.
We realized the car was there, and he went out. He found Sandra bleeding and moaning in pain.
He panicked. He was terrified.
Tony Ponicle then immediately runs back into the house and dials 911 and reports, "Oh my God, my roommate has just been shot. I think she's dead. Please come, please come."
As Tony tells his story, it becomes clear that Sandy was a lot more to him than just a roommate.
He is destroyed. He is emotionally distraught.
We found out in the investigation he wanted more out of the relationship, maybe it to blossom into boyfriend-girlfriend type relationship, maybe an engagement down the road or marriage.
Tony claims that he respected Sandy's decision, and things had remained platonic between them. But investigators can't help but wonder, had he really taken her rejection so calmly?
Mr. Ponicle, we definitely viewed him as a suspect, being that they were in a close relationship. Those are the people that we want to start with at first.
Coming up, police explore a new suspect and discover another layer to this growing mystery.
He beat her up and raped her and held her prisoner for 2 days.
He absolutely rockets to the top of the list of potential suspects.
Pinellas Park detectives are investigating the murder of 37-year-old bartender Sandy Razzo.
Sandy's roommate, Tony Ponicle, the guy who calls 911, the guy who admittedly had a romantic interest in her, but she didn't want it.
At this point, you don't know if he's a suspect or not. Obviously, you want to include those folks who may be a suspect until you rule them out.
Detectives secure the crime scene and begin collecting evidence. But to their surprise, Tony also offers to let them search his car and personal belongings.
He was very cooperative with us, giving us consent to collect evidence from his vehicle, from his home, and giving us honest answers to all the questions we were asking.
Tony has been cleared as a suspect, so police expand their search in hopes of finding a new lead.
She worked at a bar, and that would open up avenues for us to get to know who would know her and who might want to harm her.
The number of times a person is shot when they're murdered says a lot about the person who pulled the trigger. And in this case, we have 8 rounds. That's rage.
Tony tells detectives he knows of someone that fits that description perfectly. A man by the name of Tracy Humphrey.
Tracy worked as a bouncer at the bar where Sandy worked, and that's where they met.
He was a model employee and the kind of guy you want to be friends with.
Tracy also worked as a personal trainer in a nearby gym, and he liked to entertain Sandy with tales about his past.
Tracy begins to explain to Sandy that, yeah, I used to be on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I used to be a star in Iowa on the football team there at the university. I was a model.
Tracy had sort of pestered Sandy to go out with him, and she resisted that.
When Sandy said no, that was it. Game on for him. Tracy starts to become a little bit clingy, and she immediately begins to back off.
But Tony tells police that one night in February of 2002, Tracy crossed the line. He asked Sandy for a ride home and then somehow talked her into going inside his apartment.
She alleged that he attacked her, sexually assaulted her.
He beat her up and raped her and held her prisoner for 2 days.
When Tracy finally let her go, she sought refuge with a friend who encouraged her to contact the police.
She tells him what happened. And immediately, Tracy is brought in and arrested and charged with this kidnapping, sexual assault, rape.
If you looked at the crime photos, she had a very strong case against him. There were bruises all over her face.
But not everyone had been so quick to believe Sandy's story.
He came across as being so kind, caring, Never heard him raise voice, anything.
He explained to me, like, hey, I had an incident last night. I'm kind of worried. We had a crazy, wild sex thing, got out of control. And she seemed to like it. And it's kind of scary now because, she's acting weird about the whole situation.
Eventually, his case was set for trial. He was looking at perhaps 10 years or more in the state prison.
But before the trial could take place, Sandy was murdered.
He absolutely rockets to the top of the list of potential suspects.
Detectives pay Tracy a visit at the fitness club where he works, in the nearby town of Brandon.
We tried to interview Tracy Humphrey. However, there were allegations by Sandy, so he respectfully declined to do an interview at the advice of his attorney.
Despite Sandy's disturbing allegations, Tracy appears to have put the past behind him. In fact, he'd just gotten married the day before the murder to his 20-year-old protege, Ashley Laney.
Ashley had met Tracy while she was working at a smoothie shop, and he worked at a gym nearby.
She started practicing personal training sessions with him so that she could get her personal training certification.
She seemed like the wholesome girl next door, and they really seemed like they were happy into each other.
Just 9 months after they met, the pair decided to tie the knot.
They got married on July 4th. They didn't go on a big honeymoon. All they did was go to the beach.
She wanted to get married on a day where every year they would have fireworks on their wedding anniversary.
When police question her, Ashley says she and Tracy were both at home the night Sandy was killed.
They did order pizza, and her friend Toby White had come over to visit. Toby was there at the house and saw them together.
Ashley was a straight-A student, no criminal history, didn't get involved in anything bad.
I don't think she had as much as a traffic ticket in her history.
Detectives tracked down Toby White, a close friend of Tracy's.
The police had contacted me, I believe it was probably 2 or 3 days after the murder, because Ashley had told them I was with them.
She says, I was over Tracy's all night long on July 5th. Ashley was there. We got pizza. We watched a movie.
At the time that the shooting occurred, he had a pizza delivered to his home and had a receipt for it. And the delivery man easily remembered delivering it to Tracy Humphrey.
And their home is 45 minutes away from the scene of the murder. It appears neither of them could have been involved.
Tracy had motivation, but his alibi checks out. Ashley Humphrey didn't even know Sandy Razzo.
But if Tracy didn't want Sandy dead, who did? Coming up, a witness changes their story, and a new piece of evidence turns the case upside down.
Somebody's not telling the truth, because technical forensic evidence does not lie. So the question is, who had the phone in his or her hand, and who's lying?
Just a few days into their investigation of the murder of 37-year-old Sandra Razzo, detectives have hit a dead end.
Her roommate, who called 911, and Tracy, who had a motive to kill her, you've eliminated them. So as investigators, you're scratching your head. Somebody wanted that woman dead.
But when investigators talk to Sandy's friends and family, they soon come up with another lead. Her ex-boyfriend in Alabama, who has primary custody of their 13-year-old daughter.
Whenever there's a custody battle with a child involved and one of those two people get murdered, you have to look at the other person.
We did travel to Alabama to interview Sandra's ex and as well as talk to her daughter.
There was a solid alibi. They were both in Alabama at the time that the murder occurred. So we were able to rule him out as a suspect or a person of interest.
Detectives once again find themselves back at square one until they receive an unexpected phone call from a witness who wants to change her story.
Toby one day calls us and says she would like to meet with us as soon as possible.
Toby came back to us and said, I wasn't with Tracy at all, that he had asked me to lie for him early on.
Toby claims that after she found out about the murder, Tracy invited her to the house and asked her to provide him with an alibi.
My feelings about Tracy being a suspect initially were there's no way he could possibly be involved in this. He's not that kind of person. He said, I don't know what I'm going to do if you don't go along with me being with you that night. I have to have an alibi and you're going to have to be it. I kept telling myself he must really feel that he'll be a suspect, so he has to have an alibi. That must be why he's doing this.
Toby initially gives the alibi, trying to be a good friend.
But in the days since then, Tracy seemed to become more paranoid and began threatening her.
She starts getting concerned, some of the physical threats while she was working out with Tracy, where he was saying if she talked to the police, something could happen. Toby changed her story.
I was terrified. When you feel that your family could be harmed or you could be harmed, and unless they can arrest that person right that minute, you're vulnerable to them.
But even though Toby has recanted her statement, the rest of the couple's alibi still checks out. Investigators obtained Tracy's cell phone records, hoping they might reveal some discrepancies.
We learned that his cell phone was communicating near his residence there in Brandon. So it was obvious that his phone and him was at the residence in Brandon and nowhere near Pinellas Park at the time of the killing.
Tracy's phone calls prove he was exactly where he said he was. However, the same can't be said of Ashley.
They found that she was not at home, or at least her cell phone wasn't, on the night of Sandy Rosa's murder.
In fact, cellular tower activity showed Ashley's phone was used from a very suspicious location.
There was phone calls being made between Tracy Humphrey and Ashley Humphrey, back and forth, from his location in Brandon to the location right outside where Sandy was working.
But does that mean Ashley is the killer, or was someone else using her phone to cover their tracks?
Somebody's not telling the truth because technical forensic evidence does not lie. So the question is, who had the phone in his or her hand, and who's lying?
Cold-blooded murder doesn't seem to match Ashley's profile as an honor student. But when investigators dig a bit deeper, they discover Ashley's past is much darker than anyone realizes.
Her mother was an alcoholic. Her father was in prison.
You see violence. You see a young girl being raised by her grandmother, whom she counts on for everything, and then that grandmother dies. You see a broken person.
She was looking for something. She was looking for a father figure, and Tracy Humphrey provided that. Tracy provided security.
Here's this older man. He is muscular, but also very kind of sensitive. She sort of fell under his spell.
He begins telling Ashley, I'll take care of you. I'm gonna sculpt you into the perfect woman. I'm gonna help you work out, and you're gonna be a model.
So when Tracy proposed to her, Ashley wasn't just saying yes to the man she loved. She was saying yes to a second chance.
The only roadblock in this, Sandy. Sandy could send Tracy away to prison for 10 years.
Tracy Humphrey had several arrests in his past. According to state law, if you're convicted with a battery, any subsequent battery will be a felony charge. Because of the actions he took against Sandy, he was looking at a possible, 10-year sentence in prison.
Had Ashley decided to take matters into her own hands and get rid of the problem for her new husband once and for all? To catch a killer, detectives hatch a risky plan. But if it fails, they could have another murder victim on their hands.
He could have snapped my neck in a matter of seconds.
Tampa detectives have a new suspect in the brutal murder of Sandy Rozzo. 20-year-old Ashley Humphrey, whose alibi was disproven when her cell phone registered activity close to the scene of the crime.
The cell phone records quite neatly show Ashley leaving and going mobile right after Sandra clocks out of work, and in essence following her over into Pinellas County. The very next call she makes which is right after the homicide, initiates off a cell tower in Pinellas Park, not far from where the homicide occurred. It opened up our eyes to the fact that she may have actually been directly involved with the murder. But also, there's more work to be done.
If Ashley did kill Sandy, was she acting alone, or had someone else been pulling the strings? To find out, investigators come up with a dangerous plan.
Toby agreed and consented to wear a recording device on her person, trying to elicit information from Ashley and Tracy regarding the homicide.
It's especially risky because Tracy is already suspicious that Toby is working with police.
He became very paranoid, wasn't sleeping, wasn't trusting people.
With Tracy being that paranoid, of course he's going to be worried that Toby's going to drop a dime, as they say, on him at any time.
He had also gotten in the habit of hugging me recently. I know he was checking for some sort of device.
When Toby meets back up with Tracy at her house, it turns out he had been trying to reach her the whole time she was with detectives. Toby covers by claiming that she didn't answer the phone because she lost it at a local store.
I had left my phone with the police just to make sure he wouldn't find it on me. The police called and said, "We found your phone at Walmart and you can come up and get it to try and get me out of the house." We went in his car. It was literally down to the second when one of the detectives got a vest on and got behind the counter and said, "Yes, we found your phone in the bathroom." I think he was relieved when my phone was there, but he still seemed very suspicious.
Despite the scare, Toby agrees to wear the wire again. On October 22nd, 2003, Toby asks Tracy and Ashley to meet her at the gym. This time, police have also set up surveillance cameras.
We came up with a fake subpoena to try and get him upset because I figured the best chance to get Tracy to say something by mistake was to get him mad.
The document was simply a subpoena for her to appear before the state attorney's office and give a statement.
Cell phone records indicated that she was in Pinellas County at the time of the killing.
That was one thing that I hope wasn't true.
It showed like 2 or 3 times it was bouncing off Pinellas Park towers, and one of them was right about when she was killed.
Oh my God.
Tracy was very, very concerned about the investigation. He was very frightened. He was very afraid.
He started writing down on each side of a piece of paper, one for me and one for Ashley, what she was supposed to say and what I was supposed to say. Then he said, "I want you to read all this and memorize it and then destroy it."
That surveillance video is very telling. Their reactions to that and the statements they make during that night are not directly incriminating, but enough that the state attorney felt at that point they could bring it to a grand jury.
But that's not all. Detectives also get a lead about a possible murder weapon from Ashley's mother's boyfriend.
He says that he had given her a handgun that she asked for her safety. He provided Ashley with a .22 caliber Ruger semi-automatic handgun that uses rimfire cartridges, which were the same caliber and style that we found at the crime scene.
He tells police that Ashley never returned the gun. Tracy already seems to have a sufficient motive. He was facing jail time from Sandy's rape allegations. And while digging deeper into Tracy's recent activities, detectives also find charges on Tracy's credit card from a shooting range. Workers verify that he had been there with Ashley.
He was at that gun range teaching Ashley how to shoot that weapon.
Because Tracy had previous felony convictions, he violated not only state but federal law by being in possession of a firearm and ammunition.
There was no smoking gun. There was no one piece of evidence that linked Tracy to this homicide. However, because he is a convicted felon and we've had witnesses that told us he did possess the firearm, he did load it, and he was helping Ashley fire it, that gave us enough probable cause to arrest him for being a felon in possession of a firearm.
On December 18th, 2003, 8 squad cars pull into the parking lot of the gym where Ashley and Tracy are working.
We arrested her, charged her with first-degree murder.
Tracy was being charged with some federal weapon possession charges.
Once I got the call that they had been arrested, I was ecstatic. I really felt like I was safe for the first time in a very long time.
Tracy continues to deny any involvement, and Ashley appears ready to stand by her man.
She refused to talk. She stated she wanted to have a lawyer.
Do you understand what you're being arrested for?
It said the murder of a woman that I don't know.
Okay. The indictment was handed down for you for the first-degree homicide of Sandra Razzo. Okay?
Get my attorney.
What do you mean, get him?
I mean, bring him here.
For what reason?
Because I'm not speaking. I didn't do this. I'm not speaking without my attorney.
She's in love with Tracy. You're not going to break her.
She's like, yeah, my husband used to be on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, big star in Iowa State University football player, a model. And investigators said, wait a minute. Your husband is none of those things. Your husband is a violent felon.
Ashley finds out that everything Tracy ever told her is a lie. Ashley's world came crashing down.
Coming up, Ashley decides to cooperate with police, and the story she tells is astonishing.
Ashley had tried to kill Sandy once before.
Ashley and Tracy Humphrey have been arrested for the murder of Sandy Razzo. Investigators believe Ashley's motivation had been to keep her husband out of jail. But now she's discovered that everything Tracy told her is a lie.
He presented himself as a former professional football player, as an underwear model, when in reality, he had a huge, lengthy criminal past, known to abuse several women.
She realized that that whole relationship she had with Tracy was an affront, and she started realizing that she had been used. He thought that once he married Ashley, she would never testify against him because she wouldn't be able to legally. What the law says is we can't use verbal communications that you make with a husband or a wife during that marriage. However, actions can always be talked about. And of course, she could testify to everything that took place prior to that wedding.
And after speaking with attorneys, that's exactly what Ashley has decided to do.
Ashley's attorneys came to us and said she was willing to talk. We allowed her to plead to second-degree murder, and her sentence was 25-year minimum mandatory sentence. Tracy had convinced Ashley that he was innocent, that she was a scorned lover who was making up this incident, and that he had nothing to do with a sexual assault. Sandy was going to prevent him and her from living happily ever after. She believed in him. She loved him.
Ashley tells detectives that on the night of the murder, Tracy made her wait for Sandy outside the Green Iguana with a plan to ambush her.
So on July 5th, she was watching Sandy's place of employment for numerous hours. Sandy left her work at the Green Iguana in Tampa. She got into her vehicle, and Ashley followed Sandy from Tampa over to her home in Pinellas Park. Ashley told us she parked right in front of their driveway. The garage door didn't even have time to go down. She walked up to the driver's side of the vehicle. Sandy was still in the driver's seat. She just turned the car off, and Ashley just started shooting into the car, and she shot a number of rounds from outside the vehicle into the vehicle, striking Sandy.
Ashley says she fired without hesitation, and the reason why stuns everyone in the room.
Ashley had tried to kill Sandy once before. It was a bombshell.
On the night of Memorial Day weekend, there was an attempt on Sandy's life.
Ashley says that on the previous attempt, Tracy sent her to the Green Iguana with a rifle.
She stayed in that car all day. When Sandra came out, she leveled that rifle across the parking lot at her, looked through a scope, pulled the trigger, The gun went off. Ashley shot through the passenger side mirror of her car. Sandra looked around like she heard a noise and then got in her car and left.
Having shot their own car mirror, Tracy had gone to extreme lengths to get rid of the evidence.
She goes back to Tracy after this attempt, and it was a failure, and he's upset, and they have to go into sort of a cover-up mode.
So Ashley tells us they make their way over to another part of Tampa, purchase gas cans. Later on that night, the car is burned with gasoline down to the wheels.
To prove she's telling the truth, Ashley takes police to the scene of the first shooting.
Sure enough, guess what we found? Buried inside of a motel door there, a slug. That slug that matched the firearm that she was utilizing when she attempted the killing of Sandy at that time.
She also shows investigators where they buried the gun she used to kill Sandy.
We went out to this remote location with her and found the murder weapon. The handgun was put in a plastic bag and buried, and that was so at some point she could give it back to her mom's boyfriend.
Ashley was relieved, but she was a defeated woman. She knew she was taken advantage of. She knew she was manipulated. She just came across as a matter of fact. She came across believable.
She was detailing everything for us and what he had to benefit from it, but certainly didn't shy away from the fact that she was complicit in the murder and what she did. Her confidence level in making a case on him was exponentially better after she talked to us.
Police finally have the evidence they need to charge Tracy with first-degree murder.
We actually went over to Hillsborough County, where he was still being held in jail, and informed him that he was being charged with these new charges. He will be transferred from Hillsborough County to Pinellas County to face trial.
But prosecutors nearly lose their chance to convict him. On April 16, 2004, Tracy makes a daring escape from the transport van on his way to the courthouse.
Tracy is a big guy, right? 6'3", 6'4", at the time, 225. And here's this maniac, this psychopath running around.
Police immediately lock down the surrounding area, and the manhunt begins.
He was gone for hours upon hours, out and about in the community.
Out come the sheriffs and the marshals and everything. They finally track him to like a marsh, and he's coiled like a snake around a tree with some brush over him.
With Tracy back in custody, his trial is set to begin. However, the outcome is still anything but certain.
I thought he was the greatest guy in the world for over 2 years. So, of course, if you put him on the stand, he can convince other people of that. I was dreading the trial because I didn't know what the outcome would be.
Coming up, would this con artist be able to pull the wool over the jury's eyes as well?
He had no idea that she was going to do this. He wasn't there. He didn't pull the trigger.
Tracy Humphrey faces the death penalty in the murder of Sandy Razzo. His wife, Ashley, has already confessed and taken a plea deal to testify against him.
You would have a husband and wife essentially testifying against each other. And the fact that you had an older man with a history of deception who was able to get a young woman to marry him one day, kill for him the next, that's just so unusual.
I think we felt pretty good about the case we had against him. In my mind, it really hinged on their ability to believe Ashley.
On February 14th, 2006, almost 2.5 years after Sandy's murder, Tracy's trial begins.
The trial starts on Valentine's Day. I found it quite ironic. This was all about love, right?
Prosecutors describe him as a violent criminal who used his wife to take vengeance against Sandy for accusing him of rape.
Tracy Humphrey had convinced Ashley that he was being wrongly accused by a girlfriend that was jealous. Tracy was saying, I can't go to prison. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I love you. She's lying.
He was very manipulative. She became enamored with him and for whatever reason seemed to be very subservient to what he wanted.
To keep suspicion off himself, Tracy directed Ashley to take care of all of the details.
He's got that type of street smart that he feels he can beat the system. He was thinking that nothing would come back to him.
Ashley had received a firearm from her mother's boyfriend.
Ashley tells the jury that after her first failed attempt, Tracy sent her back with a warning not to mess it up this time.
And when Sandy Rosso left the bar, she followed over the bridge and into Pinellas County.
So Sandy Rosso pulled into her garage. The door was still up. Before she could even get out of the vehicle, Ashley shot numerous rounds into the vehicle. And ultimately into Sandy Rosso, killing her.
She says Tracy even coached her on what to do afterward.
Tracy had told Ashley, make sure that you get the job done. You don't want her waking up on the hospital bed telling what happened. You want to look in her eyes and look for a certain vacant look that will confirm that indeed she's dead.
After the shooting, she, along with Tracy, went out and buried the gun in the woods in Hillsborough.
The next morning, they go to the gun range and they shoot and they get gunpowder on themselves so they could explain why, if they were caught, why there was gunpowder on their hands or clothes.
I loved him very much and I did not want to lose him.
So you were willing to kill another human being because you loved him?
Yes.
He's the one that had the most to gain out of this, and where he participated in this case by helping destroy evidence and the statements that he makes along the way to her that are verifiable, it's very obvious that he was in charge.
On February 23rd, he takes the stand in his own defense.
He has a pretty solid defense on paper. He wasn't there that night. That's easily proven. He was at home.
He basically blamed Ashley Humphrey, said it was all her idea. He had no idea that she was going to do this. He wasn't there. He didn't pull the trigger. He couldn't explain away those videotapes that we had of him interacting with Toby White and Ashley. He couldn't explain the number of calls as Ashley sat there and waited for Sandy to get off work.
And you told her over and over, it's not what you say, it's how you say it, correct?
That is correct. I did say that.
Here's a character that has a lengthy criminal history. He's lied. He is accused of rape and battery and kidnapping on his ex-girlfriend. So people just didn't buy it.
On February 24th, 2006, both sides rest their cases, and less than 3 hours later, the jury returns with their verdict.
They came back with a verdict of guilty as charged, which is murder of the first degree.
I will sentence you to the Department of Corrections for the rest of your natural life. You have no possibility of parole.
I was at home when the verdict came back. It was just such a sense of relief. I'd feared all along that he would get off on this charge because he can con people. He didn't get off.
If we hadn't utilized Ashley as a witness, Tracy probably would have gotten away with murder.
This guy who has apparently gotten away with so much in his life is getting what he deserves and exactly what he didn't want, which was jail.
But while justice has been served, nothing can repay the terrible cost of his revenge.
Sandra's daughter missed out on having a mom for the rest of her life. Her mom, her sister, missed her tremendously.